All right, welcome everybody to another edition of the Virtual Throws Conference. I've lost track of how many we've done of these, but excited to have Coach Brian Woodbury on. Coach is at University of Maine and formerly of Slingshot Throws. So excited to talk a little bit about coaching high school, coaching club, and making the move to D1. So thanks for joining us, Coach. And why don't you give us a little introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. And secondly, you pretty much nailed it. At this point, I'm 29 going on 30. I've been coaching as long as I can remember, pretty much since I got out of high school. I started Slingshot in 2017, and that blew up into opportunities I never dreamed would be possible. So now I'm into my third month with the University of Maine, which I'm an alumni of. So it's been an incredible honor to be there, first off. I started October 1st, so I've had a lot of different pieces moving and a lot of things happening all at once during a pandemic. So it's been fun, to say the least.
Yeah. So my first inclination is to ask you how you like the move to Division 1 from your club setting, but that's
Yeah.
kind of a silly. I'm going to ask it, but it's kind of a silly question because your first 5 months at UMaine are in the midst of a pandemic. Were you
Yeah.
guys even on campus this fall?
Well, so my first day wasn't until October 1st. So I got in basically as everyone was already kind of out of quarantine and testing was a little more consistent. So people were on campus this fall. We were able to train and have practice and at least get the ball rolling on whatever implementing culture and expectations and some of these other things. So we've at least taken the first step into kind of reestablishing the program. So
Nice. And you've been, so sorry, you might have just mentioned this, but have you been able to work with your athletes in person a little bit throughout the
yeah,
fall or?
yep. So throughout the fall, we were able to. We basically just had smaller groups testing masks, the whole 9 yards. So we were able to do things as normal as we probably could. So the the rules and everything around COVID didn't really stop us from
Yeah.
training as hard as we wanted and needed to. So we didn't really take any steps back because of it. It was more of a nuisance, but obviously a necessary one to make sure that everybody's healthy and not, bringing this virus all over the country when they go home for Thanksgiving and Christmas and whatever else. So it's all been necessary, but we've been getting through it pretty well.
Nice. And when do you guys start back up?
Everyone's coming back at the end of January,
Nice.
and then
Yeah.
we'll see what happens as far as if we have any indoor meets or if we wait for outdoor or if outdoor even happens. And there's obviously a lot that goes into this with every state having different rules, laws, all the universities having different perspectives and rules on how they want things done. So it'll be interesting to see how much we can get on the same page and have some meets. Because obviously track in nature, I mean, we're talking about historically having 4, 5, 6, 7 teams in a building and hundreds of people, and it just isn't conducive to operating as usual. So we'll end up seeing what happens. Hopefully outdoors, getting people outside, we'll be able to either have more people or distance better or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Sweet. So you're at UMaine now. You're kind of early in that journey. Prior to that, you founded Slingshot Throws.
Mhm.
And how did you get started in coaching even before that?
So basically, I started coaching almost immediately after I graduated high school, only because my little brother was a few years behind me. So, long story short, I played college football for a couple of years before transferring to UMaine to throw. So those first couple of years I was playing football, every time I was home, I would just go to track practice and help out. Um, Primarily because my little brother was there, and it was just a fun way to spend time together and help him out. And then from there, I coached at Scarborough High School just as a volunteer for many years until I started Slingshot in 2017. So it was 6, 7, 8 years or whatever, just kind of unofficially helping out. And then from there, I got into private coaching just because it's an interesting story, I guess. I mean, we went to the New England Championships with Scarborough, and I had two athletes there. And obviously, there's a ton of athletes there that I noticed didn't have coaches, or, were doing some fundamental things wrong. And it was just like, wouldn't it be amazing to kind of level the playing field of coaching, and really help some kids get opportunities that they otherwise didn't know existed, couldn't get before. I mean, track and throwing opens a lot of doors for people that, otherwise there wouldn't have been one. So I just remember thinking, like, man, if some of these kids knew what they were doing, because there were some strong, big kids that I remember throwing like 53 feet with awful technique. And it's like, for whatever reason, as a coach, I've always had an eye for potential. Like, I just see kids and I go, he's a 60-footer, she could throw 45, whatever it is. And I kind of see the end goal when I look at some of these kids. So long story short, the next day I was like, screw it, I'm going to get into private coaching. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no plan, no nothing. I remember just like brainstorming, business names and club names, and it all came together really fast. I would say within 48 hours, I already had my old logo. So we weren't on like the upside down triangle sector logo, but I was like off the ground. A lot of people knew who I was anyway from coaching at Scarborough. So I started like very small. I had maybe 2, 3, 4 high school athletes, and they all got exponentially better really quickly. And we created a lot of noise, and that was that. And then it just blew up. I mean, the first meet where it became very apparent was a conference championship. I was coaching 3 different kids from 3 different high schools, and we took 1, 2, 3 in discus, and it was all, like, how did that happen? Like, no one knew who this kid was, and this kid broke a record, and it just became it just exploded like right in front of our eyes. And then before you knew it, I had 10, 15, 20, 25 clients and throwers from all over New England. And, it really just starts with, that one moment. And then it turned into, a couple people breaking records and throwing over 60. And then that led into kind of the next person that wanted to do the same thing. So it became kind of a revolving door of people that wanted to take it to another level. I would say the passion in throwing over the last handful of years has quadrupled, at least. I mean, a lot of people, didn't really care too much about it. It was like a side sport for, keep you busy in the off season for football or whatever. And then before you know it, people are like quitting football and leaving their other sports to really focus on throwing, because it is a very, for like a perfectionist, like if you have that personality, it's the perfect sport. It's a never ending chase and journey. Like, you're never good enough. So, for the right personality, it becomes obsessive. So, and we've been fortunate to have a lot of athletes that help put me in the position I'm in now. I mean, if I didn't have the right kids come in and we didn't accomplish things we did, none of this would have ended up happening. So I've been fortunate that the culture that was created through Slingshot has blown up into something a little bit different that I definitely wasn't expecting at all. So,
Yeah. I mean, I want to spend most of our time on, throwing, but it's an interesting kind of business scenario too, where you started this small club, and in, I guess, 3 years, you had people, I think you said, state records in 4 different states, including North Carolina. So, is that just word of mouth, or how did you, so quickly kind of get the word out there and kind of market yourself in that way?
well, it's weird. I mean, I never even marketed necessarily. I mean, just Instagram. And my goal was to develop kids to get into college, and open doors for kids and give them opportunities that they just didn't have. So, put it up on Instagram, tag with a bunch of hashtags, see who can see it. And then, as the kids got better and better, and we were, winning meets and breaking records and championships and everything else, it started to just get a natural following. So, kids that would throw 50, 51 were suddenly like, I want to throw 62, 63, 64. Like, can you get me there? And it's like, well, I'm confident in my ability to do that in a relatively short amount of time. So a lot of my higher level kids that have gone on to Division I and broken records, have put on 7, 8, 9, 10 feet in, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 months. I mean, it's not anything magic. It's just a matter of instilling a work ethic and a program that inspires people to reach some of those goals. But it starts with having, you know, the first kid or the second kid accomplish something big, so it looks real. You know, so like a lot of the times when I work with younger kids, I like to have them in a group setting with college kids and elite high school kids, so they can visually see that these things are possible. Like there's a person right in front of me doing it. So I think there's a lot of like that's what I'm looking for, like mystery, and like how is this possible? Like how can someone throw a shot put 70 feet? And you know, you watch it on YouTube, but it doesn't quite register until you like see it in person, and then it becomes a little more interesting. But yeah, it all kind of started. I mean, we won that meet. That was kind of like the first one that sticks in my mind, where suddenly, you know, parents were coming up to me and whatever, and then it turned into something. But then off state records, we coached state record holders in Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and North Carolina. So that's, yeah, those 4 states. So just in 3 years, we've been fortunate enough to, in a lot of freaky ways, like rewrite New England throwing high school records in a very short amount of time in 4 different throwing events: hammer, weight, shot, and disc. So it's been I've just been fortunate.
Nice.
There's really no other way to put it. And I just had the right kids at the right time, and you know, the best coaches in the world. If you don't have any kids with talent, you know, you go unnoticed. So it's the nature of the sport.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You talked about, you know, kind of building that culture and having people train in a group where they can see the people that are a little bit older, a little bit more experienced than them, be accomplished and grow and learn and kind of draw inspiration from that. But, you know, if you're coaching people in Maine, Massachusetts, and North Carolina, they're not, you know, I would imagine they're not all able to train together, you know, super frequently. How do you kind of balance that with that remote element? It's, you
I
know,
would say, yeah. Well, it's interesting because while it didn't happen consistently, I did have a group of kids in Massachusetts that would routinely come up 2 or 3 days a week, 2 hours each way for practice, and it's
wow.
uh, and obviously that says a lot about them and what they're trying to accomplish. And for all those kids, it's all panned out. They're all at Division I schools or wanting to be at Division I schools or throwing in college or whatever. So there is an element of, again, the right kids. And I always, you know, talk about success through sacrifice. And I know, you know, the kid I coached to win a national championship was from Massachusetts. He came up 2 hours each way, a bunch of days a week for 2 years. I mean, you just can't coach that like it factor. Like some people just have it and some people don't. Some people will find excuses and others will get rid of them. And when you find those people, that's when it becomes a little more interesting. And then when you get them all together and you can start to create that culture, suddenly you have a support system that, you know, not only encompasses Maine, like when you're having like a dual meet and like suddenly a bunch of your training buddies are in the same meet, you know, that obviously helps invoke a lot of success because everyone's supporting each other. But then by the time you get to New England, you know, I have kids from every state in New England basically competing at the same meet. And it just creates a really fun, like dynamic, passionate environment where everyone's supporting each other. Like we'll start slow claps or whatever, and we just get the place rocking. And it's a really amazing thing to see. So, and obviously from that, it built a whole lot of like a community aspect and a family aspect. And, you know, we all obviously keep in touch and support each other in whatever capacity is necessary. So
Very cool. And so I'm kind of sticking on the remote coaching for a minute because I feel like that's what we're all doing right now. So nobody's
right.
going to do a whole lot of coaching in person right now. So this seems particularly applicable. But you know, even if your Massachusetts kids are coming up 3 days a week to work with you, you know, I'd imagine they're practicing on other days. You know, how are you managing kind of that and giving them feedback? And what are some of your kind of tips for making remote coaching successful and productive? So I feel like
Yeah,
that's a fine line to tread.
it is. It's really difficult, especially coaching high school. It really takes, again, the right kid that can handle remote coaching. It takes a kid with the right high school coach that's open to collaboration. You know, all the kids that I've been successful with from other states where I don't see them all the time. I've had good relationships with their coach, and I've had coaches that have zero interest in their kids working with a private coach at all. And that obviously creates a whole other slew of issues. But as long as the kid is like your focus and really what's important to you, instead of kind of your own accomplishments as a coach, if you put the kid in front and go, what is the best opportunity for this kid? I've been fortunate to work with a lot of coaches where that is their focus. So we collaborate on training programs and whatever. But remote coaching is inherently difficult, as you know. I've had some kids that have done really, really well with it because they can manage their own time and motivate themselves. And, there are some kids that can't handle it. But with all the technology now, I mean, you can do FaceTime sessions, you can do sessions over Zoom, Skype, whatever. Video analysis is obviously huge. And then I think just having an idea as to like the big picture and what you're working on. So generally in all of my annual plans and coaching plans and everything else I do, there's always like an end goal in mind, whether that's PR or win a championship or go to nationals or whatever. And you just kind of chip away at it over time. So I always talk a lot about getting 1% better every day. So like not wasting a day. 1% can be anything, whether you sleep 8 hours at night or eat an extra meal or don't eat the piece of cake or whatever, just that one little bit that's going to get you one step closer. That makes it much more attainable. So for the remote people, I think that makes a lot more sense, and they can learn to hold themselves accountable to a different standard. So
what degree are you having to, be that motivator and remind them of that, that goal and that long-term vision when you don't get to see them every day?
Almost all the time. I mean, every time we have a conversation, it is about the long-term goal and understanding how the accumulation of all these training efforts is what leads up to that one moment. So I talk a lot about, like, a lot of kids will get frustrated like in season and they'll be like, oh, I didn't PR. It's like, okay, well, it's the third dual meet. Like no one cares, so there is a psychological piece to it. There's a piece where you need to learn how to compete and understand what's actually important, because I know kids want to go out, every regular season meet and PR every single week, or they want to come out and open big in the first week. And then what you end up doing just psychologically is you come out, you PR by 7 feet in your first meet. Okay, cool. So that's now the bar. And then if you throw 2 feet under, now you're suddenly, devastated. And, it's just important to understand what the journey is. Like no one's going to remember who won the dual meet on February 3rd. It just doesn't matter. People remember championships, people remember nationals, all-American titles. Like those are the bigger picture goals that are, I don't want to say easy to lose track of, but in the moment, you're obviously very either frustrated or happy with that performance that day. But as long as, you always tie it back to the bigger picture, that usually helps alleviate some of that, I guess, call it daily stress or distraction.
That's great. That's funny you mentioned as soon as you PR, you reset that bar. I was, and it's just funny the parallels between some of these that we see. By the time this goes up, we'll have one up with Coach Chris Mack at the Olympic Training Center. He trains multis, and we were talking throws a little bit there, and we were talking about just development in the combined events, and he was talking about he doesn't look so much at PRs but averages, and it's the athlete that you are is the average of your 3 or 4 best performances of the year, and it's really hard as an athlete to keep to look at it that way.
Yeah, well, and as like a career as a thrower too, it's like you're remembered for one mark, one throw. That's really what it comes down to. So it's like, obviously when these guys are like signing shoes and autographs or whatever, they just put like their PR. Like that's what you're known for, is one. I mean, you can bomb out of 3 meets or whatever, but you end up throwing 2250, that's what you are now remembered for, So, there's a lot of, psychology at play with how it all works. Because I mean, training is obviously extremely frustrating and stressful. It's like if you're a 50-foot shot putter, you want to throw 60. Every time you throw 52, you're like ready to rip your head off. But understanding that progression it's truly like a ladder. It's like a step ladder. It's like you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. And it's always and as a coach, I feel like it's easier to manage, because I understand that and I can explain that to people. I'm trying not to like name names and for obvious reasons, but it's like when someone comes and throws 55 on their first day with me and they hit this stupid huge PR, then they spend, 4 weeks, 52, 52, 52, and they get frustrated. And then in a couple of weeks, it goes 57, 55, 55, 55. So just understanding how kind of that linear progression of getting better works. But in throwing, there's just so many variables with getting better, because, I think a big thing a lot of coaches don't talk about or teach or whatever is how to compete, what mental toughness looks like, how to overcome adversity, how to do a lot of things that, you can have someone perfectly peaked for a meet and they choke. I mean, then it's all for naught, So understanding how to compete and learning that throughout the season, I think is the key to all of it. Because that's the thing too. You can go out to practice, hit 5-foot PRs all day, every day. Tape measure comes out and you throw 3 feet under your PR and you're right back to where you started. So
Yeah. So you're at UMaine now, and obviously a little bit of a weird year, but it's got to be quite a bit of a different environment than Slingshot Throws. And what differences are you seeing, and what surprised you making that switch to D1?
well,
College
I'd
rounds?
say I'm taking over for my college coach, Gerhard Skoll. So I knew what I was getting into before kind of taking the leap. For me, it's always been a far-fetched dream job to think I could coach at my alma mater. I mean, I figured, I'd work a full career Monday through Friday, whatever, until I was 60, 65, and then start coaching college. And, life just didn't have that in the cards for me. And I tend to see opportunity and jump on it and figure it out later. So the second the stars kind of aligned on that, that became my first priority. So, but obviously, as far as differences, obviously the NCAA obviously has a reputation for rules, regulations, what you can and can't do. Obviously, being a private coach and effectively my own boss, I mean, I could go to any meet I wanted, travel anywhere I wanted, talk to whoever I wanted. I didn't have any rules. So it's been an interesting transition. It's one that I knew, I being a thrower at Maine previously before I graduated, obviously, I was pretty aware of how some of the rules work. So I wasn't completely caught off guard, but it's definitely different.
Yeah. And let's start, talking a little bit, about the actual throws. One thing you said earlier is you had an eye for, feel like you have a good eye for potential and spotting potential in throwers, before they maybe realize that. What are some of those things that, stand out to you as potential makers for throwers, or young throwers?
That's a great question. It's interesting because it's something that I feel like I just like shoot from my hip and I just see a kid and I go, yep, he has it or she has it. And I don't really know why, but I mean, the more I kind of drill into it, I think it has a lot to do with like kinesthetic awareness and understanding how your body moves through space. And I feel like that's something that you can teach. It would just take a very, very long time. And some people just know how to move their body. So I'd say it comes down to kinesthetic awareness. Obviously, everyone's aware of kind of snap, like you see a shot leave someone's hand, whether it goes 60 feet or 40 feet, you see that, that fast twitch is available. Then it just becomes a matter of getting them in the right position to apply power for the longest period of time possible. So like a lot of my technical, perception is, I don't want to say like easily acquired, but I coach a very linear rotation, and I feel like it makes a lot more sense to people versus, obviously everyone hears the connotation of spin, so people think literally spin in circles and dump the ball into the sector and hope it goes where you want. But I've coached a very linear model of rotation that I feel like is a lot easier to grasp, and it allows them to progress at like a very rapid pace. Because basically, I mean, all the throw comes down to is how long you can apply power and force to the implement. And then obviously, and that's about it. I mean, as long as you can figure out how to apply power for the longest period of time possible, the implement will go. but if you just kind of spin around and hit it and hope it goes somewhere, it won't work. So really, as long as people have kinesthetic awareness, you see a little bit of snap, and then follow it up with mental toughness and work ethic, and obviously enjoying the gym, because I feel like weightlifting is, I don't know, probably 75% of the sport. I mean, power production is the name of the game. So if you don't enjoy the gym, then this is a really difficult sport to get yourself into. So just some of those intangibles. If some kids have them all, some kids have a couple. Some of them you can just work on with them. But when you have them all, that's when you start to see kids jump 7 to 10 feet in 6-7 months.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that people, and especially young throwers, realize like all of this is possible up to like your genetic limitation. So it's like if you wanted to throw, I've had people 6'5" throw 60 feet, and I've had people 5'10" throw 60 to 67. Like there really isn't a black and white template for how this goes. So I think that's important, because a lot of people watch, obviously, people like Ryan, 6'7" and whatever. So people think I need to be that big to throw that far. And the honest answer is you don't, because then the very next thrower, you have Tom Walsh come up, and and suddenly the narrative changes a little bit, or Joe Kovacs, and and then you go down through the history of like great American throwers like Adam Nelson and Reese Hoffa and Christian Cantwell. Like they're all drastically different people and have drastically different strengths and weaknesses and abilities. But really what it comes down to is maximizing the things that you do really well and finding a way to have it work for you. So as long as you understand the strategy and technique and kind of what you're trying to accomplish, anybody can be successful, which is why, I spent a lot of time studying technique, and really, instead of looking at all the differences between people, like height, weight, age, whatever, really is trying to look at like the commonalities between all of these guys. Like they're all drastically different, but they're all throwing roughly the same, or beating each other by a few centimeters here and there. But really finding the commonalities, and then from there, it's determined by the athlete. So I'm very much not a cookie cutter, like one size fits all kind of coach. I feel like everyone I've coached that is thrown, I guess, call it 50 to 55 or further, almost all look drastically different.
Yeah.
I don't really know how it all worked out, but some people are capable of having a wide right sweep leg. Some people aren't. So you just kind of take what they do naturally and maximize it.
Yeah, very cool. You started touching on this a little bit, but we talked about potential in the student or the athlete, and could you talk a little bit about your philosophy of how you're molding that, and your general overarching philosophy of how you're developing a thrower and coaching that event, and or any of the events for that matter? Like, what are some of your big pieces you think are really important?
I think I mean, my background is primarily in football. I feel like most people in throwing can attest to that. That's just kind of how it, I guess, starts and then turns into. So as far as like my philosophy, like I'm really big on focusing on the end goal. I would say I'm really big on mental toughness. So I get this question a lot too, like, why do I program straight bar deadlift? I get that pretty routinely. And I feel like the answer is mental toughness and knowing how to compete. And I think that's like the biggest part of the athlete internally. I feel like that's the most important thing, is knowing how to compete, especially with yourself, and knowing how to overcome adversity. And those are things that I know I learned through football, which most people can probably attest to. But I've worked with throwers that never played football that, get the same gist of how that works. As far as technique philosophy, again, like molding it to the individual athlete. But I think for me, if I were to kind of boil it down on the spot, I mean, the important things for me, I basically have like 4 L's. So left, long, level, and linear. So out of the back, those are like the 4 things I'm looking for. And then after that, it's just a matter of making sure you have your weight in the right spot out of the back, and you're catching the shot as deep as you are physically able to, and then staying in contact with the ground and the ball as long as you can. And that's basically the gist of how to throw far. Like it's almost uncomfortably simple. And I know that's why it's so frustrating for a lot of kids and athletes that have all these questions. And, I think I've had a lot of success with people that don't ask so many questions, if that makes sense. So it's like, okay, well, let's try to get your right foot dorsiflexed. And they go, okay. So we do that and we fix it. Or we have the other side of it where they go, well, why? Or shouldn't my shin angle be this? And then it becomes a convoluted mess. But if you are super coachable and you kind of like trust in the process and understand what's happening, kind of after the fact, then you buy into it a lot quicker, and some of those technical changes happen much faster. So I feel like the more questions you ask, the more answers you may or may not get, and kind of the further into the rabbit hole you go, as far as technical philosophy goes. But
Now, here's a question for you. Maybe a little bit back to the remote coaching, our current situation. How do you balance as a coach not getting too in the weeds with an athlete and, worrying about X angle and, Y position, but also equip them with enough technical knowledge that when you're not there or when you don't see a throw, they can still kind of stay grounded and, make some progress and give themselves some feedback?
yeah, I think just doing video analysis is important, and making sure that you're consistent with your cues, I feel like, is a big piece of it too. So a lot of things that I talked about as far as being like left, long, level, and linear, those 4 L's, literally when you do video analysis, you can like literally draw over people and kind of draw them in the position you want them to get in. And I feel like that helps kind of concrete some of those concepts. And then when they actually go back and look at their own video, they can see, okay, well, my shoulders weren't level, or okay, my right foot wasn't dorsiflexed, or whatever it might be. Just giving visual cues, especially most of the people that I work with remotely or used to work with remotely are like obsessive compulsive over technical pieces. So it becomes a lot easier just to draw over it, send it to them, talk over it, whatever. Obviously, there's a million coaches that do video analysis, but
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like the general gist of it is really coaching timing and positions so they can start to learn from themselves what works and what doesn't. Because kind of on that same token, I definitely encourage the kids to, this is what I see, experiment with it. If it works, great, let's keep it until it doesn't work, and then we'll change it again. Because I treat every training session and, whatever as an experiment. Like there really isn't a template for this is your perfect throw. Like what works today might not work tomorrow. What works next week might not work today. So there are things like that where I encourage them to experiment. And then as they start to get some success, they can start to figure out for themselves what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's great. Could you, I liked your 4 L's, that's kind of a cool, simple way to kind of walk through the throw. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and go in a little bit more depth of what you're looking for there and what those mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because early on as a coach, like I said, I kind of winged it. Like I was just like, screw it, I'm going into private coaching, and then suddenly we had a lot of success. And I literally remember sitting down and handwriting, like, why is this working? So it like forced me to like try to figure out why these certain things are working. So it basically boiled down to like reflection, basically. But those 4 L's just came down to me trying to essentially teach myself back how to throw, or the things that I would look for. Or if I were an athlete again, what do I, wish I had as a cue, or wish I understood, or whatever it might be. So as I was kind of writing down and reflecting on all this, that's just what I came up with. I mean, my kids give me a hard time all the time because one of my biggest cue is like, you got to get left. And obviously to a lot of people that can mean a lot of different things. But basically all I'm looking for is for your armpit to relatively be over your left knee and your toe. So it kind of starts there. So that'd be left. Long would, depending on like the personal degree, is like how long you can get your right leg to obviously maximize the amount of rotational energy you're creating. level just in your shoulders. So obviously coming out of the back and you're nice and level here is drastically different than coming out of the back and being here. And I'm sure we've all seen a million people do that out of the back and eat the toe board. So that would be those first three. And then linear, I feel like is where I lose a lot of people. Because I feel like those first three make a lot of sense. And then linear inside of a rotational concept, some people, it clicks and they understand. And some people are like, I don't get it. Like you're spinning. But like I said, I coach a very linear model of technique. So one of my biggest cues for that linear piece is trying to hold your chest to the sector as you move forward. So you're not just continuing to rotate through the middle, because obviously the goal is to catch the shot as deep as you can in double support and work it as long as you can through the finish. And I've just found if you come out of the back and you don't hold to the sector, you miss all that torque and tension in your core. But if you're traveling forward towards the toe board until a right foot touchdown, suddenly you're starting to feel a ton of torque and tension in your core. Then it's a matter of, one of my simple cues is like squeeze or like flex your core. So they enter the middle and really try to resist the rotation. And while they're holding, their lower body is obviously moving under them. So they start to catch the ball even deeper with both feet down. You have all that like summation of forces and all that torque in your core, and then bang, it all snaps out and around. And then, that's where that effortless throw, phenomena comes from, is just utilizing the forces you create and understanding the timing in which it takes to make the ball go. I'm sure we've all seen a bunch of people that can, like myself, bench over 4 and do all these other things, but I never threw any further than 53 because I didn't understand a lot of these concepts. Right. But it's really not a matter of how big or strong you are. Like all of your power comes from timing, and I think that's a really confusing thing for young athletes to understand. I know for me as an athlete, I never understood it. I mean, my biggest gripe with cues going back is the whole idea of like, use your legs. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? How do you want me to use my legs? Like I'm standing up, so it all just means different things to different people. But I think once you start to understand the timing of, the sequence of events that needs to happen, that's when the far throws come. Because you can be as strong as you want to be and have your shoulders come unwound before your hip and it's all over. Like just like that in a quarter second, all that energy you just created just dispersed on the spot. And you went from a 55-foot shot putter to a 46-foot shot putter. But it's funny because it is that, minute, like that small of a detail is what makes all the difference. And sometimes it takes 6 months for people to understand. Another big cue for me is left down, shoulders back for a right-handed thrower. So it's like when your left foot touches down at the front, I need your shoulders to be back. I can't have your left foot down and suddenly you're wide open because you've lost all this space and time to apply power to the ball. So a lot of those teaching moments obviously happen throughout practice. And I feel like a lot of those, once they feel them, I don't want to say they'll never revert, but they'll revert and they'll know that feeling that they're missing. And it's generally in their core.
You talked about, staying linear out of the back, pushing across the circle, getting some of that tension in the core. How do you prevent, how do I want to phrase this? How do you prevent your throwers from kind of getting stuck in that linear? Like as that right foot touches down in the center, but then, and not then lagging to get the left to the front.
Question. Well, I would say, again, this is where it kind of depends on. What's that?
Not to get too in the weeds, but.
Well, it's interesting because it goes into another kind of technical philosophy, because obviously there's a million ways to throw. There isn't a right way to do it. I just generally prefer a linear model. And then obviously coaches differ all over the place. Some people love the concept of spinning around and then trying to like sling the ball out the right sector, whereas I coach a very linear rotation and I want them to throw slightly left of the middle of the sector, so they're all lined up and pushing. They're kind of just finishing at the end to get it left of center. But that's where I kind of experiment with the left leg and the left foot. So some people like a really low left heel. I'm personally a big fan of a really high left heel, especially because, again, coaching a linear model, I want everything to be as tight and close as possible so they catch the ball deeper at the front. So
Yeah.
generally what I found, if they're moving forward and right foot comes down and their left heel goes up, that rotation happens naturally.
Yeah.
So it's never really been something I've had to coach per se, but it's something that we can definitely drill and practice, just doing half turns and step in half turns. And really, I think the step in half turns are a staple drill, and I use them all the time. So basically both feet in back of the circle, stepping forward with your right foot, and then as your right foot comes down, punching off the left, getting a high left heel and snapping it down at the front. That way you limit the amount of rotation you're creating with your shoulders. So obviously as you step through it, you're creating all this torque and the ball just stays. So before you know it, both feet are down and the shot's way back, probably too far back, to the point where it's not comfortable to actually finish. So you got to kind of find what your ability is, mobility wise. But that's where kind of the experimentation comes in with every practice.
Very
So, I mean,
cool.
sometimes, like I said, I kind of shoot from the hip. Like if I'm at practice, I'll say, let's try keeping your left heel lower and just see what happens. Or, okay, we'll get it high. Or for some people, sometimes I have to break my rules. Like instead of being level, I don't know, maybe they get out of the back a little better if they're down here, maybe up a little higher, So it just is a matter of experimenting and seeing what happens.
That's great. You were talking about, I guess, you have a lot of this club background, and you've got, athletes coming to you from different states, different coaches, different, ability levels and capabilities, technical, abilities. What are some of the biggest, performance issues or technical issues, maybe even physical issues that you're seeing commonly when you have athletes come to you for the first time? Okay.
A lot of it comes, and I almost hate to keep going back to it, but I feel like it is that important. Like mental toughness and overcoming adversity and learning how to compete are the hardest things to like instill in people that aren't natural competitors.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like you can really coach competitiveness and mental toughness and overcoming adversity in the weight room. So I'm a big believer in, obviously it's like every throws coach is, in the weight room. I mean, it's a really important tool, not just for your physical development, but for your mental development. And that goes back to why I program straight bar deadlift too. I mean, that is a highly taxing compound lift, obviously. A lot of people are scared of it because they think they'll hurt their back. So they throw a Band-Aid on it and bring out a trap bar. And, suddenly you're not getting the training effect that I want of mental toughness, overcoming adversity. Like it's you in the bar, like bar is either going to come up or it's not, so there are moments like that where you learn a lot of that in the weight room. So a lot of people that I work with that have never gone to a weight room, or they're happy with finishing 10th in the conference or whatever, like that's all fine, because obviously we can tailor things to what your goals are. But when I have people that have high level goals, it's like, I'm upfront with them. I'm like, this is what it's going to take. Are you willing to do it? Because I don't private coach anymore, but when I was private coaching, some of my first conversations were like, are you sure you're ready to do this? Because it's not easy. Like when people see, I want to put on 8 to 10 feet. It's like, okay, well, basically what we're going to do is cram like 2 or 3 years of training into 8 months. So it's like, it's possible. Like I can get you here, but you need to hold up kind of your end of the bargain. And it's a lot for sure. That mental toughness piece is crucial. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. So obviously when, again, not naming names, but when I coached the 2019 indoor national champion in high school, he won in round 6. He won on his last throw.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, that's a training effect. And that's also who he is intrinsically. Like he is that dude. Like he's cold-blooded. Like a lot of people aren't that way. But basically, to paraphrase, he came out in the first round through 65 mid, so he was leading the whole way through, and thankfully part of our strategy going into the meet, and that's another thing, meet strategy, we could probably dive into, and I can reveal far too many secrets for how that works. But But meet strategy, so going in and winning prelims, he obviously gets last rebuttal. He gets the last throw of the meet. So no matter what happens, it's on you to come away with the W. So either you're going to or you're not, basically. But basically, first half of the meet went exactly how he wanted to. Big opener, clinched the top seed going into finals. Then in round 6, and I remember telling him between prelims and finals, because the person who our biggest competition was warming up huge, had huge fouls. And I remember telling him, like, get ready because it's coming. Be ready to respond because it's going to happen. You're going to have to do it. Like, get ready now. So going into round 4 and 5, we kind of had this inkling of, okay, we got to start executing because it's going to happen. Then in round 6, he came out and threw, I don't remember what it was. It was like a few inches further. And like the energy in the armory just like fell to the floor. Like everyone was like, oh my God, like, did that really just happen? Like I remember I felt like legitimately sick to my stomach because for me as an athlete, I have a history of finishing second. It drives me absolutely insane. I've lost championship football games, second at conferences, second this, second that, whatever. So I've always had like whatever the winning gods against me. They always wanted me to be like that close, but never quite get it. So I just remember feeling like sick, but obviously he had last rebuttal. So I went from like sick to elated in about 3 seconds because I wasn't about to let him see me deflated. So the first thing I did was whatever, scream. I mean, we definitely bring a lot of energy to meets. So I'm screaming and hollering and, in his face about responding, whatever. And he comes out and he does it in round 6, the biggest stage in high school track and field. Comes out, he doesn't PR, but he won the meet on the very last throw. And I've never went from like dead to alive in such a short amount of time. Like that day took years off of my life, I promise you, because that was the most amazing, terrible experience I've ever had. But that goes back to the training and understanding, like, meet strategy, what it's going to take to win, how to win, and then training to be clutch and like be that guy when all the marbles are on the table. Like, it's time. Some people can and some people can't. I know for me personally as an athlete, I would have choked and folded right there on the spot because as a coach, I had that 3 seconds of like, oh, like gut punch. But that's what makes me a better coach than an athlete. I mean, I know what it takes, but I'm not physically capable. But for that to happen, that just goes back to the really sucky summer workouts and getting through workouts where you're miserable and lifting weight that you don't want to lift and like things are heavy and hard and difficult, and it all accumulates to this one moment where you get to decide, did I do all of that for nothing, or did I do all of that to win right now in this moment and like really own that moment? But that's something that, like I said, you got to like train that. Like you're not gonna be able to just have someone show up and win nationals, like, or even on a smaller level, a state championship or a regional championship. Like there are things you need to train to make those things happen.
So you feel like, a part of that building that ability to be clutch on the moment, would you call it like having put in enough of a body of work to have the confidence, or is it something more specific to what you're doing, in some of those gnarly workouts and things like that?
Well, it's a combination of both, I think. I usually like to, and I haven't done this at Maine yet because I'm really not super established at this point, but I really like the idea of a 3-throw comp. Like literally, like at the end of practice, you're dead ass tired and you throw a shoe out in the sector and go, this is for nationals. Like, are you going to foul out? Or are you going to hit the mark? So over time, you start to instill confidence in them. Obviously it doesn't always start like, oh, wow, they're smoking every 3-throw comp. Like that never happens. But over time, they start to build the confidence that they can do this in the moments that matter. So obviously you need to fall on your face a few times first. Obviously, every great thrower I've ever worked with or even read stories on or whatever, they all have this moment where they like face plant, and they have like the biggest choke job of their life. And for him in high school, his junior year, he came in as the 1 seed for the Massachusetts State Championship and threw 46 feet. He finished like 15th. He was devastated. So obviously that takes away his ability to go to New England's. And that, to me, and we talked about it too, because I remember leaving that meet and going, this is the defining moment of your career. This right now, this low that you're at is what's going to bring you to heights that I knew were possible, but he didn't even think were on the table. So sometimes you just have to fall on your face, and those moments where you choke are the ones that teach you the most about yourself and how you need to respond to adversity. Because obviously for him, going from the 1 seed to, you might as well call it fouling out, all the social pressure. Obviously he went from being a nobody to somebody. He was like getting interviewed by the paper, mile split, like it became so big, and for him to have to like deal with that and learn from that is what got him to the next level. So
how do you help your athletes in those fall in the face moments learn from the experience rather than just get discouraged?
yeah, most of them are a big hug, I love you, we'll do better next time, whatever. Obviously as a coach you want to own it for yourself and be like, where did I fail, and how did I not prepare him or her for that moment? And obviously that was on me too, because that was like my first year private coaching. I will own that forever because I learned a lot myself. Because of course you're thinking, well, I got the top seed by 7 feet. Like how could this go any different? And you learn quick that it can in fact go very different, because no championship goes as seeded ever. There's always going to be 1 or 2 fish. Like it's just going to happen. So, but it started with that, and then I remember either texting or calling him and being like, you have 24 hours to like mourn this. And after this 24 hours, we're on to outdoor, and that's it. So that motivated him to, a whole different height, because he came out outdoor and broke 60 feet for the first time, PR'd by 3-4 feet, and competed really well at nationals. And that was really where it was like, okay, we can do this and build off of it, because experience is a big part of winning at a high level too. You need to fall on your face at least more than once, and you've got to get yourself into big high pressure meets, like no matter what, like even if that's when you fall on your face, that experience is so important. It's so vital to your long-term development and ability as an athlete to do that. That's pretty much that. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that are coming up now talking about it, but really it started there. That was kind of the spark that started his next indoor being 65 plus for an entire winter.
Nice.
But it started by him throwing 20 feet shorter a few months prior. So it's interesting to think back at how it all happened and came together. But those are all lessons that I obviously brought with me to, other athletes. And, I feel like as a coach, you do yourself a disservice by not constantly learning. Like I definitely know I do not know everything. I know that some of the things that I do work. I think I've gone through a lot of formal coaching education as of late because of my new profession, obviously. And there are things that I thought I was doing just like intrinsically. Like I was just like, I know that works and no one else does. And then you take some of these courses and you're like, oh, you're telling all my secrets, or like, oh, there is a word for that, or that is a cue, or whatever. So, and that just kind of goes back to, you can be as good as you want to be. I mean, every tool is at your disposal because of the internet. I mean, there's nothing stopping anybody except yourself from accomplishing the things you want to accomplish.
Very cool. One more question, or I got a couple more questions, a little bit more on the training realm, kind of go into the nitty gritty of throws. I got one question about when you first start working with an athlete. Do you have any sort of like protocol or onboarding process that like helps you get to know them and kind of like see what they need to do? Or is it just throw them to the fire and then, kind of?
Well, it's I guess what I call baptism by fire. Yeah. Because I mean, we basically, when Slingshot started growing, we put a gym in our garage and we train all our kids literally here in my house. So while I understand there's a whole lot of personalization that goes into training, a lot of people, when they came to Slingshot, were the strongest people at their high school, the baddest dude on the football field, whatever. And then suddenly reality kind of hits you in the face with, what's possible, like having high schoolers deadlift over 600 and back squat over 5 and bench mid threes. And, it opens your eyes a little bit more to just throw them in and be like, this is what we're doing, kind of catch up.
Yeah.
And I think mentally they're like, okay, this is who I want to be. This is what I want to do. This is what it's going to take. So, the first couple weeks are rough, a whole lot of lactic acid buildup and super sore and walking like penguins and baby giraffes and all this other stuff. But the most amazing thing happens after those 2 weeks. Obviously they're beat, but they're throwing further than they've ever thrown already. So there's a piece of that buy-in where they see that it works and they see everything happening around them, that this is working. So suddenly, you're a 45-foot shot putter or 46-foot shot putter. You come into this training environment, and then the next indoor you come out and throw 55. Like there are things where I feel like you just gotta throw them in and see how they respond. Because again, it's part of that mental toughness and overcoming adversity theme that is kind of at the core of how I operate. Because I think it's so important. Because otherwise, you just never, especially for people that didn't play football. And I always go back to that because I played for 16 years, but you just learn a lot about yourself and how to like dig deeper when you didn't think you could. I always use the idea of like 4th and goal from the 1 with 1 second left in a football game. Like for me as an offensive lineman, there's no way in hell I'm getting blown up. It's just not happening. So, and finding a way to like dig that deep is, I think, important. Whether it's as silly as doing, my wife is big into CrossFit, and I've taken so many different concepts that I love as like a coach, and I've kind of taken the things I love and kind of disregarded the things I don't like, and like put my own spin on some certain things, and I've kind of created a system that I just feel like has worked. So, and I was upfront with people too, like when I've had these first meetings, like this isn't going to be for everybody, and that's okay. Like you can definitely still throw, and you can still go to your high school, and you can still, compete and whatever, but this is just a different thing. It's a different entity. It's for, people that want to take it that far.
Very cool.
And they understand that relatively quick. So
great. So it's in a way you do have that way of onboarding and a process, and it's kind of addressing that mental side first, and then that's great. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you approach training design and how you're putting together, like what might a typical week or a training cycle look like for you and your crew?
Yeah, it's always interesting because ever since I kind of started, just using the knowledge that I had from football and throwing in college and whatever, I would kind of put programs together, and it's been really interesting actually to see how they like evolved over time and like gotten more and more specific and whatever. But I would say from a general sense, I think I'm pretty untraditional in the sense that I put a big focus on absolute strength first. And I know I catch a lot of slack for that because I like to effectively graduate them into Olympic lifting. So instead of saying like, okay, on day 1, we're going to learn how to power clean, and this goes back to why I program straight bar deadlift too. Like if you can't move weight from that position, I feel like there's no point in doing 95-pound power cleans when we should be spending our time and effort on, squatting over 300 for the first time, or, something along those lines. I feel like you need to be strategic with where you're spending the athlete's energy. So I guess generally, like in an annual plan, I would say I go from like circuits and work capacity into heavy strength cycles for probably a couple weeks or a couple months. and then go into more speed work. And then by the time you hit that, you're off and running into the regular season pretty much. And at that point, I don't put a premium on any meets except for championships. So it's more so like, okay, like we got to get you qualified so you can go. And then at that point, I've put together peaking program. Like I pretty much have an entire year's programmed out for exactly how I need them to respond at big meets and championships. So, but yeah, just to go back to some of that. So Olympic lifting, I'll add later on. I really like using clean complexes as a way to still Olympic lift constantly without actually having to invest a ton of time in learning how to move big weight fast from a clean, especially because they're just simply not ready. Like I feel like I probably introduced for men Olympic lifting outside of just like 135-pound clean complexes. I don't know, probably bench around 3, squat around 4, deadlift around 5, and then it's like, okay, cool. Now let's learn how to actually Olympic lift, because obviously it's a key part of training for our sport is Olympic lifting, but and then moving big weight fast. But it's like I want to invest that time into basic building blocks of like strength that I feel like need to be acquired before learning how to snatch or clean and jerk and everything else. Because I would rather introduce it and start having 225, 275, 315 moving instead of spending time on 95, 115, 135, 180. So it's I just feel like it's time better spent. But I would say that's kind of my philosophy there. Deadlift, for all the reasons we talked about, I'm a big fan of that. Obviously triphasic training I feel like is key. That's definitely not a secret. Working eccentrics, isometrics, and concentric movements is really important. And I feel like the eccentric part of that cannot be undervalued. Like eccentric training is so key to getting those bigger absolute strength and numbers, and then that will obviously have a trickle down effect in everything else you're doing. But that's pretty much training design in a nutshell, I suppose. I mean, I'm big on core strength. I try to, as much as I can, get in some like pre and rehab stuff for IT bands, patella tendonitis, shoulders, lower back for all the weight and hammer guys that get destroyed 10 months a year. I'm trying to throw that. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else specific. I'll just say this too. This is something that I know I catch a lot of slack for too, because while I believe in like a warm up, I'm very sport specific. So obviously, if you think about like a track meet, you get off the bus and you have like 20 minutes to go throw or whatever. So I feel like there's like a fight or flight kind of moment in competition, and that kind of goes back to the mental thing too, where generally speaking, let's say we get into the gym, we'll do like a little bit of like dynamic flexibility and all the normal stuff, and we'll jump into a clean complex because I want to try to get their heart rate spiked or get them ready to go. Another big thing I'm a fan of was 30 calorie rows as a warm up. So trying to row 30 calories as fast as you can. So that obviously gets your heart jumping, and that's a big mental exercise, because you get to about 24, 25 calories and you're gassed, like so super gassed. And some of my more powerful guys can, row 30 calories in 45 seconds or to 40 seconds, which is pretty impressive. It's, almost a calorie a second. I've had people do 30 calories in like 34 seconds. So then you're talking like real power, like you're creating a ton of force. And then, some of my lower end people can do it in like a minute or a minute 10. It's a really easy way to gauge, their work capacity, their mental toughness. Is the training working? Is their work capacity in a place it needs to be? So that's kind of like my warm up. At that point, your first set, or the first time you touch a bar, it is your first set. So I'm not a big believer in, okay, like if we need to, obviously there are exceptions to this. If you're squatting 600 pounds, your first set's not going to be 550. Like I understand that, but there are pieces where it's like, okay, if your first set is 275 on back squat, that's the first bar that touches your back. So it's like you need to fire up, flip that switch, be ready to go, control your body, like all those things go into it. And I feel like it's taught a lot of people how to uh, respond to challenging stimulus quickly. um, and I definitely don't recommend it for like everybody, but I definitely, for the kids that I know kind of fit that mold, they're like a spark plug. That's that's what I like to do. For me personally, I used to like, I guess I call it like do or die training, where it's like no warm up, no shoes, no belt, no knee sleeves, no whatever, and go in and go, okay, I'm gonna try to squat, whatever, I'm gonna try to Hatfield 600 pounds. Like you just go in and like do it. Now, obviously, again, it's not for everybody, but it's one of those things where it's like, I need to know that my body can produce now what I'm trying to do. So I always use the example of like you witness a car accident, right? And you gotta jump in, try to help somebody. You don't want to be that dude that's like, oh, hold on, like let me loosen up and like stretch out my hamstrings and then jump in, because especially in a meet, like you usually don't have that option. Like, you usually roll off the bus and it's like, hey, it's 10 o'clock, like start throwing. So it's like, and especially for throwers, you have such a limited opportunity. You get 3 throws. If it doesn't go your way, you're done. If you're lucky, you get 6, or if you prepare accordingly, you get 6. So I don't know, that just kind of goes into that too. But I figured I'd address some of the things I get a bunch of crap for. So
Yeah, I mean, if you can do it in a way that, is still safe and you're getting some of that, you know, training of how to flip the switch, I can understand that for sure. Could you walk us through a typical Coach Woodbury practice? Like, I guess what are things you're doing in typical practice? Obviously that changes, day to day and based on the time of year, but I'd love to just kind of get into your head a little bit about like, what are you doing, before you throw, after you throw, partial throws, drills, full throws, like, when are you lifting, these sorts of things, just to, kind of round out our training talk.
yeah, I guess I'd say I really try to, as best I can, create some sort of routine. So it's like every time you go to practice, it's exactly what you expect. So that way, every time you go to a meet, nothing changes. You have the same routine. It's kind of a psychological, stimulus to like, okay, it's go time. Like this is what I need to be able to do. But generally, I would say warming up. Um, I like to break down the stand throw as a warm up. So I'm not, we'll do some like dynamic stretching and whatever, but my warm up is generally with the implement. So by breaking down the stand throw, I basically have it in a handful of positions. So I'll try to describe this as best I can, but basically I start with front throws. That'd be like both feet up against the toe board, really trying to harp on a linear finish. So both feet against the toe board, leaning back, feeling all the stretch in your core, hit, kind of keeping your left side dead, and bang, and hitting the ball out. So there's a very kind of like catapulty effect of throwing the shot. And the reason I like doing, well, all the exercises I'll describe is you can do them with light shots, heavy shots, comp shots, whatever, rocks, logs, just weird things. And you can start to get different training effects out of it depending on the time of the year. So it's a really easy way to, work special strength into a throwing session. But start with that. Then after a few of those, generally I want every single throw to go at least a little bit further. And between positions, I expect a relatively big jump. And it's also a teaching tool because they start to figure out the longer I'm applying power to this implement, the further it's going. So depending on the position. So I call those front throws. The next ones I call step-ins, and that's just both feet in the middle, shot still not on your neck yet. You step forward with your left, and same thing, nice and linear finish over the top. And that should go, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 feet further than the previous position. And then from there, I go to what I call a 3/4 stand throw or an open stand throw. So that's like your chest and shoulders out the side of the circle. So not fully wrapped yet, but just here. And here you can really focus on starting the movement with your right leg and then clearing your left arm while you hold the shot back. So you get a lot of that stretch out of your chest. And that should go 6, 7 feet further than the previous position. And then we finish with starting all the way wrapped up in a stand throw. So again, I like to do that because of, it's a really easy way to get special strength in. It's a really easy teaching tool for understanding, the difference between landing in an open stand throw as a rotational thrower versus landing in a closed stand throw as a rotational thrower. Obviously at that point, depending on your level, I mean, that's a difference of 7 to 8 feet on your full comp throw. So it's like, that's a huge timing piece. So I definitely like to harp on those. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with that, but that's generally what I call a stand throw progression. We do that all the time. It's an easy way to do it. From there, it really kind of depends on what we're looking for. Like if we're in like a pre-comp or comp phase, going right into fulls, because again, I need them to respond now and figure that out. Or if there's a very specific technical piece we're working on, like we talked about before, either a low left heel or a high left heel or whatever, doing some of those step in half turns. I'm not big on South Africans at all. I generally hate them because they create a laundry list of technical issues and like false senses of timing and power, because you can just blow yourself over the toe board and smack it. But it also doesn't teach how you're actually supposed to come out of the back. So, and I place a premium on that, because if you can't start, you can't finish, and your entry needs to be consistent. And I think a lot of people learn that in competition over time too, whether you're throwing on concrete or wood, your entry can't change depending on the surface. Because I think a lot of people learn real quick that, when they go to nationals and throw at the Armory, or they throw in a wood circle and they're from, some other part of the country where they only throw on concrete, throwing on wood is a very, very rude awakening. It's very, very fast if your entry isn't good, because you can get away with a lot of things on concrete that you can't on wood. So definitely place a premium on all of that stuff. So we do a lot with the entry, a lot of harping on the entry. I'm really big on like focusing on the left foot out of the back. So I know some people like to under rotate it. I personally try to shy away from it if I can, because that doesn't feel like a powerful linear position to me. Like coming off the outside of your left, it just feels like you're kind of falling and trying to catch yourself on your sweeping right. But I try to get them to get squared up and move linearly. So basically it would just kind of depend on the athlete and what we're working on, and I mold it to that. And generally I shoot from the hip on that too. Like if I see something, I can either straight up stop the practice before the bad habits built, or if they hit a really great throw, end the practice, so that's what their nervous system and their body remembers going into the next day. I had a good conversation about that the other day too, like when to stop the training session. And I think that's important, because you start to imprint the wrong technique. Like once you're gassed and you're still throwing, you're like one more, like it's not going to get any better. And I know as an athlete you think it is, but coming from a coach that's done it for far too long, it's not. And usually that will carry into the next day. So as far as training for the next day, how did yesterday go, what went well, what didn't, what do we need to change, but trying to go into the day with like a general theme of what we need to accomplish, I think is important.
Very cool.
But yeah, usually if practice ends bad, 80% of the time your practice the next day is going to go pretty bad too. So it's like if you and it's frustrating, and there are times of the year where if it's going well, I'll throw them till they're tired anyway, because it doesn't really matter. Like there isn't like a meet or something we're preparing for, but there is something important about like, wow, that one felt really good, okay, be done. So you can bring that feeling to practice tomorrow, and you try to string together 4, 5, 6 great days of training, rest, try to do it all over again. And that's how the progression kind of works. So
nice. I mean, anything else as far as pieces of training or pieces of technique you think are really important that you want to share while we're still on here? Or
well,
anything we haven't got to that you're excited about?
Well, I mean, I feel like we definitely covered a lot more than I was anticipating. I haven't coached now for like a month or more, because we've been home on winter break and COVID and whatever. So this is kind of fun to get my brain working again for how this should go. But I guess I think what's important with these podcasts, especially with the people you've interviewed, is for younger people and younger throwers that are trying to figure this out. Obviously, there's so much like ambiguity to throwing, and it makes it really difficult to try to understand. So I guess my suggestion would be like learn as much as you can, throw as much as you can, try to experiment with, different philosophies, and, like don't go into it thinking, this is a big thing for me. Like I want to throw like, because it's like, well, that technical model might not work for you. Like if you're 5'10", you shouldn't be watching people that are 6'5", and you shouldn't be trying, so it makes it a little more interesting. But, and I would say, try to study as much as you can and watch as much video on elite level throwers as you can, and look for the commonalities. And I feel like that's a huge key in understanding how this works as like a system, and like how to make the ball or the implement go, is looking at commonalities and then putting your own spin on it. So eventually you need to learn to throw like yourself. Like you don't want to go to a meeting and go, I'm going to throw like Reese Hoffa today. It's like, because that was actually a moment that I took after he probably doesn't remember this, but when I met him in my very first year of Slingshot, I went down to nationals and I met Reese and we were talking and he said something very specific that always stuck with me, because we were talking about kind of the same thing. Like, what are you looking for on video? Like what, who is your technical model? Like, what are you trying to, like, and he's like, well, I don't want to throw like Reese Hoffa. Reese Hoffa only throws this far. And that always just kind of like stuck with me, as far as like, it's a really unique perspective where you do need to learn your own strengths and weaknesses and cater your technique to that. So you start to develop your own technique and you become a technical model for maybe other people that are your size or whatever. So I think there's a lot of learning that can be done. Obviously, the internet is an endless resource of knowledge at this point, especially in the throwing world, because so many people have podcasts going. And, I try to listen to as much as I can. And then from there, as a coach, just like take what you like, leave what you don't, put your spin on it. And that's kind of like the art of coaching in a nutshell, is, putting your own imprint on what you're trying to do. But I think that's the biggest thing for the younger kids, is just to understand what it takes and try not to get frustrated. I know, thinking about me as an athlete, it was a never ending abyss of frustration and not understanding why I was unable to do certain things. But I feel like that's what makes great coaches is, we fall on our face all the time. Then we see where the hurdles are. And when we start coaching, we just move them. So it's like when we see that moment coming, we just sidestep it. And we can actually get kids where they want to go. So
very cool. Maybe that's a great place to end the recording here. And I appreciate you joining us, Coach, and look forward to seeing everything you do up at Maine when you finally get a chance to do it. And hopefully that's coming up soon this spring. But I will stop the recording there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.